June 11, 1944, 18,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alex Vrakius circled his Grumman F6F Hellcat in lazy figure-eights, scanning the horizon through his bubble canopy. The afternoon sun glinted off the dark blue paint of his fighter, and somewhere far below, the carriers of Task Force 58 steamed westward toward the Mariana Islands. Then, his radar intercept officer's voice crackled in his headset. Bogies, many bogies, bearing 265, Angels 20. Looks like the whole Japanese Navy is coming. Vrakius smiled. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was about to begin. What the Japanese pilots didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined as they flew their nimble Zeros and agile Judies toward the American fleet, was that they were heading into a mechanical slaughterhouse. The Hellcat waiting for them was designed with one purpose: kill Zeros. Not outmaneuver them, not outclimb them, just kill them. Efficiently, repeatedly, without mercy. Over the next 8 hours, American Hellcat pilots would shoot down 346 Japanese aircraft while losing only 30 of their own. It was the most lopsided aerial victory in naval history, and it was exactly what the Hellcat was built to do. When Japanese intelligence first obtained photographs of the F6F Hellcat in late 1943, their assessment was dismissive. Compared to the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0, the Hellcat appeared to be exactly what it was: a big, heavy, brutish machine optimized for qualities the Japanese didn't value. Where the Zero weighed 5,300 pounds empty, the Hellcat weighed 9,200 pounds. Where the Zero could turn inside anything in the sky, the Hellcat turned like a truck. Where the Zero could climb at 4,500 feet per minute, the Hellcat managed a pedestrian 3,200 feet per minute. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, the brilliant tactician who had planned the Pearl Harbor attack, reviewed the intelligence reports and concluded, "The American fighter is typical of their thinking. Heavy, crude, relying on engine power rather than finesse. Our pilots will destroy them as they destroyed the Wildcats." He was catastrophically wrong. What Genda and Japanese naval intelligence failed to understand was that Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation hadn't tried to build a better Zero. They'd built a Zero killer, and the difference would cost Japan its naval air force.
Leroy Grumman's engineering team on Long Island had access to something the Japanese didn't: combat reports from every Wildcat engagement since Pearl Harbor. They'd studied gun camera footage, interviewed surviving pilots, analyzed wreckage of shot-down aircraft, and they'd learned something crucial. Air combat in the Pacific wasn't about dogfighting. It was about who could deliver killing firepower first and survive long enough to fight again. The F4F Wildcat, Grumman's earlier fighter, had proven one thing conclusively: American pilots couldn't outmaneuver Japanese fighters. The Zero was simply too agile, too light, too nimble. Trying to turn with a Zero was suicide, so Grumman designed a fighter that didn't need to turn. The F6F specification, issued in June 1941, called for something unprecedented: a carrier fighter with the speed of a land-based interceptor, the range of a patrol plane, the firepower of a destroyer, and armor thick enough to fly through hell and come home. Chief designer William Schwendler's team delivered all of it. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, the same power plant used in the P-47 Thunderbolt, produced 2,000 horsepower. Mounted in the Hellcat's lighter, more streamlined airframe, it gave the fighter a top speed of 380 miles per hour, fast enough to catch any Japanese aircraft except the newest interceptors. But speed was just the beginning. The real genius was in what American pilots called the Grumman Iron Works guarantee. You could fly a Hellcat through a storm of bullets, and it would bring you home. The F6F-3 carried 212 pounds of armor plate. Steel behind the pilot's seat, 3/4 inch thick, capable of stopping 20mm cannon shells. Armor around the oil cooler, armor protecting the engine's vital components. Even the windscreen was bulletproof glass, 2 inches thick. The fuel tanks were self-sealing, lined with a rubber compound that swelled when penetrated by bullets, automatically plugging holes before fuel could leak. The entire fuel system was protected by CO2 fire suppression. The wings were built like bridge girders. The main spar could support 14 G loads, more than 7 times the stress of the most violent combat maneuver. The control cables were duplicated throughout the aircraft with automatic backup systems. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare, who would become the Navy's first ace of World War II flying the earlier Wildcat, tested an early Hellcat prototype and reported, "I emptied a full belt of .50 caliber into the tail section from 50 yards. The aircraft landed perfectly. This thing is bulletproof."
The Japanese had optimized for weight reduction, stripping armor to maximize maneuverability. Grumman had done the opposite, built a fighter that could absorb punishment no Japanese aircraft could survive and still complete the mission. The Hellcat's armament was simple and devastating: 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, with 400 rounds per gun. Total ammunition load, 2,400 rounds weighing 600 pounds. Rate of fire, 4,800 rounds per minute combined. Convergence range, 300 yards. At that distance, all 6 gun streams met in a zone roughly 4 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 80 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition mix, armor-piercing incendiary, tracer, and ball rounds ensured that hits meant destruction. Japanese aircraft, built light for maneuverability, had minimal armor. Most had no armor at all. A Zero's main fuel tank sat directly behind the engine, unprotected. The wings were fabric-covered in places. The structure was so light that American pilots reported shooting Zeros apart with single bursts. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, after his first combat in a Hellcat, reported, "The Zero I hit didn't burn, it disintegrated. The wings folded, the fuselage broke in half, and the pieces tumbled toward the ocean. I'd never seen an aircraft come apart like that. The .5 calibers just destroyed it." The Hellcat's guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude, electrically charged to ensure synchronization, and equipped with automatic boosters to prevent jamming during high-G maneuvers. German and Japanese pilots dealt with frequent gun jams. Hellcat pilots never did. The F6F entered combat on August 31, 1943, launched from USS Essex during raids on Marcus Island. The Japanese defenders, equipped with Zero fighters, expected easy victories against what they assumed would be another clumsy American fighter. They were wrong. Lieutenant Commander Charles Cromwell, leading VF-9 Squadron, encountered a formation of 9 Zeros at 15,000 feet. The Japanese pilots, confident in their aircraft's superiority, turned to engage in a dogfight, their standard tactic that had destroyed dozens of Wildcats. Cromwell's Hellcats didn't turn with them. They maintained formation, used their superior speed to dictate engagement range, and when the Zeros committed to attacks, the Americans simply powered away, climbed, and came back with altitude and speed advantage. Then, the .5 calibers spoke. Cromwell's combat report was clinical. Engaged 9 enemy fighters. Our formation maintained discipline. Utilized speed advantage to control engagement geometry. Destroyed 6 enemy aircraft confirmed, 2 probable, 0 losses. The pattern would repeat across the Pacific for the next 2 years. Japanese pilots would try to force turning engagements. Hellcat pilots would refuse, using what they called boom and zoom tactics. Dive, shoot, climb away. Repeat. The Zero's advantages in maneuverability became irrelevant when Hellcat pilots simply refused to turn. Commander John S. Jimmy Thatch had developed a defensive tactic while flying Wildcats that became standard doctrine for Hellcat squadrons. 2 fighters would fly in a loose formation, separated by about 1,500 feet. When attacked, they would turn toward each other, repeatedly crossing paths.
Any Japanese fighter pursuing one Hellcat would fly directly in front of the other Hellcat's guns. The thatch weave transformed the Zero's turning advantage into a death sentence. Lieutenant J.G. Alex Vrachu described it. They'd get on your tail, confident they could outturn you. You'd call your wingman, start the weave, and suddenly the Zero chasing you was flying straight into your wingman's gun sight. They never learned. They kept trying to turn with us, and we kept killing them. By December 1943, the loss ratio told the story. For every Hellcat shot down, American pilots were destroying 19 Japanese aircraft. The supposedly inferior American fighter was slaughtering the legendary Zero. The Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19–20, 1944 would demonstrate the Hellcat's dominance so completely that American pilots nicknamed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese had assembled their carrier striking force, 9 carriers with 430 aircraft, for a decisive battle to stop the American advance toward the Philippines. Their pilots, many of them replacements with minimal training, had been assured that the Zero's superiority would prevail. They flew into a buzzsaw. Task Force 58 had 15 carriers with 891 aircraft, mostly F6F Hellcats. The American pilots were veterans, many with dozens of combat missions. They'd trained against captured Zeros, knew every weakness, and had absolute confidence in their aircraft. At 10 a.m., the Japanese launched their first wave, 69 aircraft. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored to intercept at 50 miles from the fleet, far enough out that even if Japanese bombers broke through, they'd have expended most of their fuel fighting to get there.
The slaughter began at 10:36 a.m. Lieutenant J.G. Alex Braccio, flying from USS Lexington, was vectored toward a formation of Judy dive bombers at 16,000 feet. He recalled, "I saw them below me, a beautiful formation of enemy dive bombers heading for our carriers. I rolled into my attack dive and selected my first target. One burst, maybe 2 seconds, and the Judy's wing folded. He went down smoking." Over the next 8 minutes, Braccio shot down 6 Japanese aircraft, exhausting his ammunition. His gun camera film showed the systematic destruction, precise bursts, aircraft exploding or tumbling out of control, the efficiency of a trained killer using a perfect weapon. The pattern repeated across the sky. Hellcat formations would dive on Japanese groups, shred them with coordinated fire, then climb away for another pass. The Japanese pilots, trained in dogfighting tactics, tried desperately to engage in turning combat. The Hellcats wouldn't cooperate. Commander David McCampbell, leading the Essex Air Group, shot down 7 aircraft himself that day. His report noted, "The enemy pilots showed determination but poor training. They attempted to dogfight when they should have used slashing attacks. Their aircraft disintegrated under our fire. Multiple Zeros exploded after single bursts." By day's end, the score was catastrophic for Japan. Of the 373 Japanese aircraft that attacked Task Force 58, 243 were shot down. American losses, 29 aircraft, most to anti-aircraft fire from their own ships. The F6F Hellcat had destroyed Japan's carrier air power in a single day. Surviving Japanese pilots described the experience in post-war interrogations. Warrant Officer Kiyoshi Endo, one of the few pilots to survive the turkey shoot, recalled, "Our leaders told us the Americans flew heavy, slow fighters that we could easily defeat. They were wrong. The American fighters were faster than we expected. Their pilots were disciplined. They wouldn't be drawn into turning fights. And their guns, when those guns found you, you died. Instantly. I saw a Zero take a burst from a Hellcat. The entire aircraft simply came apart. The wings separated, the fuselage broke in 3 pieces, and there was fire everywhere. It didn't even have time to spin. It just disintegrated into falling debris. I'd never seen an aircraft destroyed so completely. We were trained to dogfight. The Americans refused to dogfight. They would dive on us with speed we couldn't match, fire from range we couldn't return, then climb away to altitude we couldn't reach. We were helpless, like fish being shot in a barrel.
By the end of World War II, the numbers told a story of complete dominance. F6F Hellcats destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat and 209 on the ground. The aircraft achieved a 19-to-1 kill ratio overall and 31-to-1 in some Pacific battles. 305 Hellcat aces were created, pilots with 5 or more kills. The total Hellcat victories, including ground targets, reached 6,477. Production numbers were equally staggering. 12,275 Hellcats were built between 1942 and 1945, with peak production reaching 600 aircraft per month. Average construction time was 16 days per aircraft. The rejection rate for quality defects was only 0.3%. The Hellcat destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter. It achieved the highest kill ratio of any fighter in history against a peer adversary, and it did this while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Navy fighter. More than half of all American naval aces flew Hellcats. The top 12 Navy aces all flew Hellcats. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace with 34 victories, shot down every single one flying an F6F. After the Marianas Turkey shoot, Japanese naval aviation never recovered. They'd lost 445 aircraft and 433 experienced aircrew in 2 days. The remaining pilots, many with less than 100 hours total flight time, stood no chance against American veterans flying superior aircraft. In desperation, Japan tried to develop fighters to counter the Hellcat. The Kawanishi N1KJ Shiden was designed specifically to match American fighters with heavy armament and better armor. It arrived too late and in too few numbers. The Mitsubishi A7M Reppu was intended as the Zero's replacement, with more power and protection. Only one prototype flew before war's end. Japan's greatest mistake was continuing to build Zeros. They produced over 10,000 A6M fighters during the war, even after it was clear the design was obsolete. American production of Hellcats alone exceeded total Japanese fighter production, and the Hellcat was just one of several superior American fighters. The fundamental difference between the Zero and Hellcat represented two completely different approaches to fighter design. Japan prioritized maneuverability above all else, long range for offensive operations, simplicity for ease of production, and lightweight through minimal protection. America prioritized pilot survival and aircraft durability, overwhelming firepower, high-speed performance, and technological superiority. The Japanese approach worked brilliantly in 1941 to 1942 when their pilots were veterans and American aircraft were inferior. But it failed catastrophically once American industry produced superior aircraft and American training created superior pilots.
A Zero cost approximately $50,000 to build and took 15,000 man-hours to construct. Each one required aluminum that Japan had to import. Each one relied on a trained pilot that took 2 years to fully prepare. A Hellcat cost $35,000 and took 8,000 man-hours. America had unlimited aluminum from domestic sources. And by 1944, American pilot training had been systematized to produce combat-ready aviators in 8 months. Grumman's Long Island factory could build a Hellcat from raw materials to flying aircraft in 16 days. Japan's factories took 2 to 3 months to build a Zero. The mathematical inevitability was obvious to anyone who could count. By late 1944, Japan had lost so many trained pilots and aircraft that they resorted to kamikaze tactics. Suicide attacks by minimally trained pilots flying bomb-laden aircraft into American ships. The desperate tactic revealed how completely the Hellcat had dominated. Japan no longer had pilots skilled enough to conduct conventional attacks. They'd been killed by Hellcats. So they sent undertrained recruits on one-way missions, hoping that sheer determination could overcome American firepower. It didn't work. Hellcat pilots intercepted kamikaze raids with brutal efficiency. The suicide aircraft, flown by pilots with minimal training, were easy targets. Combat Air Patrol Hellcats orbiting the fleet shot down hundreds of kamikazes before they could reach the ships. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia developed the Valencia Weave, a four-plane formation specifically designed for kamikaze interception. His team shot down 50 Japanese aircraft without a single loss, many of them suicide attackers. The F6F F5N night fighter variant, equipped with radar, hunted kamikazes in darkness. These Hellcats carried the AN/APS-6 radar pod on the wing and could detect aircraft at 5 miles. Japanese suicide pilots flying at night, already stressed and poorly trained, had no defense against radar-equipped Hellcats appearing out of the darkness with guns blazing. Behind the statistics were the Japanese pilots who faced the Hellcat and died. Young men who'd been told their Zero was invincible, that American pilots were inferior, that Japanese spirit would prevail over material advantage. They learned the truth in the last seconds of their lives as .50 caliber bullets tore through their unarmored aircraft at 80 rounds per second. Petty Officer Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's greatest aces with 64 victories, survived the war despite losing an eye to a Hellcat's fire. He wrote, "The Zero was a beautiful aircraft to fly, light, responsive, like a bird. But the Hellcat was a machine of war. When I saw Hellcats, I knew many of my comrades would not return. Their guns were so powerful, their pilots so well trained, their aircraft so durable. We fought with courage, but courage alone cannot defeat superior weapons flown by determined men."
I put 20mm shells into Hellcats and watched them fly away, trailing smoke but still fighting. They put 50 caliber bullets into Zeros and we disintegrated. It was not a fair fight, it was an execution. The Hellcat's last major combat came during the Battle of Okinawa, April-June 1945. Japanese kamikaze attacks reached their peak, over 1,900 suicide sorties flown against the American fleet. Hellcat pilots flew constant CAP missions, 4-hour shifts orbiting the fleet, waiting for radar vectors toward incoming raids. The work was exhausting, stressful, and deadly effective. During Operation 10 Go, Japan's final desperate naval sortie, Hellcats from Task Force 58 sunk the battleship Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, by destroying the combat air patrol that was supposed to protect her. Without fighter cover, Yamato was helpless against dive bombers and torpedo planes. By June 1945, Japan had lost over 7,800 aircraft defending Okinawa. Hellcats accounted for a significant portion of those kills, maintaining the same brutal efficiency they'd demonstrated since 1943. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, there were fewer than 1,000 trained fighter pilots remaining in the entire Japanese military. The Hellcat had killed the rest. After the war, American and Japanese engineers examined both aircraft side by side. The technical comparison revealed why the combat results had been so lopsided. The Hellcat had a top speed of 380 miles an hour compared to the Zero's 351 miles an hour. The Zero could climb at 4,500 feet per minute initially, while the Hellcat managed 3,200 feet per minute, but the Hellcat's altitude performance negated this advantage. The Zero could complete a 360-degree turn in 15.5 seconds compared to the Hellcat's 19.8 seconds, but this became irrelevant when Hellcats refused to turn. In durability, the Zero would be destroyed by 5 to 10 50 caliber hits, while the Hellcat could absorb 100 or more hits and return home. For firepower, the Zero carried two 20mm cannon with 120 rounds total and two 7.7mm machine guns, while the Hellcat had 6 50 caliber machine guns with 2,400 rounds total. The Hellcat's sustained firepower overwhelmed the Zero's limited cannon ammunition. For pilot protection, the Zero had none, while the Hellcat carried 212 pounds of armor plate, self-sealing tanks, and an armored windscreen. This represented an absolute Hellcat advantage. The conclusion was inescapable. The Zero was optimized for 1941 aerial warfare, short-range interception, dogfighting, operations from small carriers. The Hellcat was optimized for 1943-1945 warfare, long-range fighter sweeps, anti-aircraft patrol, sustained combat operations. Today, restored F6F Hellcats fly at air shows, their distinctive roar from the R2800 engine still impressive 80 years later. But the aircraft's real legacy isn't in museums, it's in the doctrine it established. American fighter design from 1943 onward followed the Hellcat formula. Pilot protection first, overwhelming firepower second, speed and performance third. The F4U Corsair, P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt all followed this philosophy. The Hellcat proved that in industrial warfare, the side that can produce durable, powerful, well-armed aircraft and trained skilled pilots to fly them will win. Maneuverability, elegance, and tradition mean nothing against superior firepower, armor, and pilot survival. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, in his memoir, captured the transformation perfectly. We were samurai flying Zeros, fighting with honor and skill. The Americans were mechanics flying Hellcats, fighting with math and machines. In the age of industrial war, the mechanics won. They didn't care about honor, they cared about coming home. And their aircraft brought them home, no matter how much damage we inflicted. I respected the Zero. I loved flying it, but I feared the Hellcat. Every Japanese pilot did. That's the difference between beauty and effectiveness. The Zero was beautiful. The Hellcat was effective. And in war, effective beats beautiful every time. Surviving Japanese pilots all remembered the same thing: the sound of 6 synchronized .50 caliber machine guns opening fire. A mechanical roar deeper than cannon fire, sustained longer than anything they'd experienced. One pilot described it as the sound of metal chewing metal. Another called it the scream of American industry. A third said simply, when you heard that sound, you knew someone was dying, usually one of us. The Hellcat's guns didn't just kill Japanese aircraft. They killed Japanese confidence, Japanese tactical doctrine, and Japanese hope. By 1945, the mere appearance of Hellcats caused Japanese formations to break and scatter. The psychological dominance was complete. The fighter they'd dismissed as slow and clumsy had become the most feared aircraft in the Pacific. From August 1943 to August 1945, F6F Hellcats flew 66,530 combat sorties. They destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in the air and another 209 on the ground. They achieved a 19-to-1 kill ratio. For every Hellcat lost to enemy action, 19 Japanese aircraft were destroyed.
305 Hellcat pilots became aces, 5 or more confirmed kills. No other aircraft in history created so many aces so quickly. The Hellcat destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter. It had the highest kill ratio of any American fighter. And it brought more pilots home safely than any other aircraft in World War II. Japanese pilots had called it slow and clumsy. They'd laughed at its ungainly appearance, its brute force engineering, its lack of elegance. They stopped laughing somewhere over the Philippine Sea in June 1944, when the sky rained burning Zeros, and the sound of 6.50 caliber machine guns became the last thing hundreds of Japanese pilots ever heard. The Grumman F6F Hellcat didn't beat the Zero through superior maneuverability. It beat the Zero by refusing to fight on the Zero's terms. It used American advantages: firepower, durability, production capacity, pilot training, to create a weapon system that turned aerial combat into an industrial process. The Zero was art. The Hellcat was business. And in war, business always wins. At the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida, a restored F6F5 sits among other legendary fighters. The placard lists its specifications, its combat record, its place in history. But the real story is told by a small exhibit nearby. A fragment of a Zero's wing structure, paper-thin aluminum with fabric covering. Next to it sits a piece of Hellcat armor plate, 3/4-inch steel with .50 caliber bullet impacts that didn't penetrate. The contrast explains everything. One philosophy valued weight reduction and maneuverability. The other valued pilot survival and mission completion. One lost 18,000 pilots. The other created 305 aces. One nation's carriers were sunk, its pilots killed, its air force destroyed. The other nation's fleet sailed victoriously into Tokyo Bay. The Japanese had laughed at the slow, clumsy American fighter. By war's end, there were no Japanese pilots left to laugh. The Hellcat had killed them all. The thunder had spoken. The sky belonged to Grumman.